So yeah, Scizor, definitely a big fan. If you've been following my content for a while, you know that I really like this guy. I mean, if you were growing up when Gen 2 was coming out, how could you not? The fact that it's actually a very good Pokemon that has stood the test of time helps a lot with that for a lot of us too. But I think before we dig into Scizor, we should talk about Scyther first. But before that, Luna's World. If you like lo-fi and want a place to chill and relax, then Luna's World is the place for you. I will leave that in the description below. So, let's just say it out loud right now. Scizor is better than Scyther. In some of the earlier gens, the gap between the two wasn't so bad. But by the time you get to like Gen 6 or 7, the gap between the two got increasingly big. That being said, Scyther is still a pretty cool Pokemon, and it's unfortunate that the only generation where it was the only form of its kind in town, it just sucked. Gen 1 Scyther is about as mediocre as Gen 1 Machamp, but even Machamp had some kind of stab option, even if they weren't that good. At least they existed and could work for certain approaches. But Scyther doesn't get a damn thing. Even the pre-special stat isn't good, having 25 less special defense than it would later, which is real bad for its weaknesses to two semi-common attacking types in a competitive scene, electric and ice. In single player, the bug flying typing isn't completely terrible, but I certainly wouldn't call it good by any kind of metric. Still, back in the day, having a Scyther in red, blue, and yellow was a little bit of a status symbol. It wasn't very common to see. And again, it had a really cool design. If there is one thing that was Scyther's saving grace from being completely awful in Gen 1, it was the fact that it not only had a base 110 attack stat, but it was also super fast at 105 speed. I can't really emphasize how fast that is in Gen 1. It had access to Swords Dance, which was pretty cool. But the rest of the move pool, it was pretty utterly barren. So actually, not that cool. Your best bet was trying the sweep with a non-recharging Hyper Beam after the Swords Dance, but think about just using a stab Hyper Beam with a strong normal type instead. Like, how is that not more appealing? At least in the PU tier in modern Gen 1, it's probably got a decent niche. Now Scyther gets way better in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Not as good as Machamp, but still really solid. Unfortunately, it still lacks a really solid bug attack. I guess in single player, stuff like Fury Cutter could be fun to try to stack, but even that move is only at 95% accuracy and starts at 10 power. Scyther would stay decent for a while as the generations progressed, but unless you're some sort of demigod creature like Kyogre, power creep comes for us all. This brings us to Scizor. I can't really describe the way this thing was hyped when Gold, Silver, and Crystal was coming out in the year 2000 for the US. It wasn't quite as hyped up as some of the other Pokemon, but the fact that Scyther had an evolution of some kind was sick back then. We'd realize soon after that it wasn't a normal evolution, as the base stat didn't increase at all, but more like an alternate form achieved through evolution. This was of course before regional variants and such, so it's kind of unique now in that regard. But replacing the flying type with the new steel typing was freaking awesome. I remember watching the anime back in the day and seeing the episode where Ash battled the Scizor trainer with Heracross, another Pokemon that got a bit of hype from fans in Gen 2 thanks to the anime. Scizor gets a pretty good amount of screen time in that episode, and it really showed off how cool the design was. Not to mention also, Gary had a Scizor as well, and seeing Gary own one, I feel like actually is kind of a part of his personality. This looks like a Pokemon that he would own. But it's got such a strong charm to it, especially representing such a unique type combo. I was so into it that it was my favorite bug type until Volcarona came out in Gen 5, which now still has that spot. But what about Scizor and gameplay? Well, like I said before, it was always able to fare better than Scyther, and that steel typing is a wonderful defensive addition. I know the 4x weakness to fire isn't ideal, but back in its debut gen, fire still wasn't very common. You're still not running into much fire in the OU tier, where it'll need to be played since it's on the UU ban list. Unfortunately, in that same OU tier, it's kind of a niche pick, mostly known for its Swords Dance baton passing. Still, in single player stuff, it could be pretty solid. Its main hindrance, again, is the lack of stab. Again. It does get more than something like Fury Cutter though, thanks to Steel Wing and Metal Claw. But those moves still aren't that great at all. The biggest hindrance isn't even the Pokemon's strength, it's just how hard it is to get. It's one of those trade plus held item Pokemon. That Metal Coat is either from post-game or a very low chance from a Magnemite if you're playing Crystal. This is just a classic Johto problem where some of the coolest Pokemon available just aren't available until the post-game. Not the end of the world if you're able to trade with yourself and you like replaying the game every now and then, but it would be better if it were more available before even the 7th gym or something. Maybe they thought it was too strong for the main game, even though it definitely isn't overpowered at all. At best, it's at the level of Typhlosion's strength. Probably worse if you're not even looking at competitive and full access to every move from a practical in-game lens. As we progress through this series, Scizor gets various improvements. In Gen 3, its move pool is a little better, but still pretty bare unfortunately. But hey, at least Scyther got stabbed with Aerial Ace. Thankfully, Gen 4 picked up the slack for it with the introduction of U-Turn, Iron Head, and Bullet Punch, as well as gaining the ability Technician. Its move pool was less barren too, so coverage and utility options were a little better, enough to make a difference and make it feel more complete. As the series continued, power creep never actually ruined this guy. It's still really good even in Gen 9, probably better than Cleaver even. Another good evolution Scyther got. It even got a Mega Evolution in Gen 6, which was pretty cool. But it is a little sad that Scyther was just ignored. I mean, I get it. They want you to evolve the thing rather than just use it traditionally. But it still feels weird since they have the same base stat total. Hell, Scyther is even way faster. It's one of the few major benefits it has over Scizor, who is, tragically, pretty slow. Yet, it still is very strong despite this, thanks to Bullet Punch and Technician, which has been a constant viable strategy for it since they introduced the two. Not to mention the horror that begins when you let it get a Swords Dance off. That's the one thing about Scizor. Talking about it once you get to Gen 4 gets kind of repetitive, because literally the same strategy has been good for so long. There is little nuance changes, like a change in preferred held item, like the boots for instance, but Scizor has been just doing its Bullet Punch thing for like 17 years now, and it's always been pretty good, which certainly doesn't bother me. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's a good place to stop for this one. Scizor is definitely one of the better Pokemon we've covered in this series so far. I'd probably rank it comfortably above Machamp in this series overall in terms of effectiveness. Machamp was great in its prime, but power creep caught up to it far more than Scizor, unfortunately. But what do you think? Any personal experiences with Scizor? Where does it rank among Bug and Steel types for you? Any Pokemon you want to see discussed next? Let me know down below.